This is Dateline News and Conversation. Well, everybody's talking about it, the Tucker Carlson interview. So I thought, well, why not us? And why not one of my favorite friends and guests? You know him if you've been watching the show. He's a Russian born American citizen, served in the United States military in a tank. He's since returned to Russia for about 10 years, and he's very popular on Russian television. Stas Krapivnik, welcome back to the show.
Nice to be here.
Well, thank you. I very much appreciate your time. I know you're very busy between your family, your restaurant business, and you're quite a celebrity. You're on television all over the place in Russia. So I'm very interested tonight in finding out your views. Now, you're Russian born, you were in America, you were educated there, you came back. But I would like to look at this tonight from the perspective of a Russian. Now, I know you've got all this history in America. You're very well aware of the politics, the media, and everything else. But I'm wondering how Russians would look, any Russian would look at this Tucker Carlson interview with President Putin. First of all, what is your assessment of Tucker Carlson? What do you think about him?
Well, he's as somebody who actually came out of journalism, because there are a lot of guys that are doing journalism that didn't come out of journalism these days, or were on the right track, but they didn't start in journalism. Judge Napolitano, though he was on Fox for a while, but as a commentator, and a bunch of other guys. There are only really a few that lived in that atmosphere, in the journalism atmosphere of the big American news medias. Tucker Carlson, the redacted guys, I can't remember the guy's name at the moment. There's really only a few. So, what can I say? I mean, the guy seems to have his head on his shoulders, firmly planted, and he seems to, I'm not going to say he's some kind of a Russian patriot or he loves Russia. He's an American patriot. He loves America, but he's doing what needs to be done, and that's, he's against this war. He's against giving the money to Zelensky. He's looking at it soberly. He's even what really makes him stand out was when he admitted that he was on the neocon bandwagon for Iraq and Afghanistan. And he even he was working for, I think he was working for Fox at that point already. And he was getting on to people who were against it. And then he realized that he was wrong. He admits he's wrong. That's something you don't really hear much in Western society anymore. The ability to admit that somebody was wrong and to make amends. That's almost unheard of in Western society, modern Western society. So that's a good sign.
How do you think he did? How do you think he conducted himself in the interview?
Well, let's begin with this. The most corrupt politician in American history, the one that should have been locked away a long time ago, otherwise known as Hillary. The woman that defended a child rapist and laughed about it. When she said that Carlson's being laughed at in Russia, he's not. She's just as much full of crap as she's ever been. No matter how old and how close to hell that woman gets, that unrepentant demon spawn gets, she's not going to change, and she's lying through her teeth as she's always lied through her teeth. Carlson's got a lot of respect in Russia, not just from mainline Russians and from Russian media and others. And he's had a lot of respect for a long time. And the fact that he's, the difference between Carlson and the swarm of the rest, the pond scum that is the rest of American journalism, the propaganda organs, in other words. And they all are asking for Putin's interview. They've all been basically blacklisted. And the reason is because every single interview that was ever taken with Putin was always chopped up and taken out of context with little sound bites. They're trying to do that now with Carlson's. Except Carlson's a 2-hour, fully unedited interview hanging there for anybody to listen to. And Musk, even though Musk is still providing Starlink to the Nazis, he's at least let this interview hang there in the open. So kudos for that. Brownie points.
Yeah.
Carlson handled himself relatively. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Mm-hmm. Carlson handled himself relatively well. I mean, Putin is no lightweight. The guy, for a guy in his early 70s, he's as sharp as he's ever been. And as any well-educated Russian, he knows Russian history, and he's going to say it as it is. A lot of people's feelings have been hurt. Have been, prefer the politically correct version of things. So overall, I think Tucker Carlson handled himself. I mean, good grief, the interview went over 2 hours. It literally went over 2 hours. It was over 60 questions. Questions weren't provided ahead of time. There were a lot of additional questions. I'm not even going to bother with talking about the American vegetable who couldn't babble his way out of a wet paper bag for more than 30 seconds before going, okay, that's a sign of full dementia right there, or a stroke, or both. I don't know if he'd even notice a stroke at this point. But the vast majority of American politicians, and now just American, the vast majority of Western politicians couldn't talk their way through 2 minutes, let alone 2 hours.
So I was asking you how you thought Tucker conducted himself, and you had segued into how Putin had conducted himself. I want to continue on that topic. For those of us who have seen Putin in his many speeches, but more importantly, with these semi-annual, multi-annual press conferences that last for over 4 hours, the man has an encyclopedic memory, not just of Russian history, facts, figures, economy, GDP. I mean, it's amazing what this guy can keep in his head and talk about in language that ordinary people like me can understand. To me, he was so impressive. I'd like your comments on this. His command of the information without any notes, without a teleprompter. His calm and relaxed manner sitting in that chair, his body language was not defensive at all. I thought was very relaxed. And I was impressed with his sense of humor. And he said to Tucker in the beginning, is this a television show or a serious conversation? Your thoughts on Putin, not what he talked about yet, but how he handled himself.
Oh, it says a lot when you got somebody like Farage, who, by the way, I used to have respect for, but it's turned out to be nothing but a globalist shill. It's a little less than most. Oh, he's much sharper than we thought he was. I mean, the West has been eating up its own BS that Putin is insane, that Putin is dying from 15 different versions of cancer, he's got Parkinson's, he's got the flu, that he's got a headache and maybe a tummy ache, and he's just about to be gone. And they're all in shock because none of their people will talk to him, because talking to Putin is evil. And when they see a man that's speaking rationally, a man that's speaking rational for 2 hours with facts and figures, without having assistants running up there, without having an earpiece telling him the facts, somebody on the other side filling him in so he can just parrot what he's been said. But somebody who's in charge, who understands the situation, It's shocking it's shocking to the Western body politic because it doesn't exist in the West. Western mainline politicians are sock puppets at best. They're used to little sound bites, very short prepared speeches, and frankly, any question and answer. And I'm not talking about Biden because he doesn't even have those because he can't handle more than half a question and a few words of an answer. But the same Macron, the same Schultz, any of them, they can't handle questions because, well, they can handle questions as long as they're softball questions. What did you eat for breakfast today, sir? Do your farts smell like roses, sir? That's about the extent of most questions that anybody in the West can handle as far as politicians go. And when they see somebody that I can't even say he's above their league. He's not. Their league doesn't exist. They get scared. I mean, they get rightfully scared. And the worst thing for them is that now the American public, the British public, and a lot of other publics have an opportunity to see that themselves. Of course, they always had if they just bothered watching any of his speeches, any of his Valdai speeches, any of his Munich speeches, and so on. But most people don't, and they don't follow along. But thanks to Carlson, because he's got a separate name and he's got popularity backing instead of just some economic expo. Now you got something a different facade, a different platform, and people are watching it. And for a lot of these people who are being marched off to war and whose kids are going to die, this is their first time to look at really what's going on instead of just what they've been spoon-fed for the last 10, 15, 20 years and absolute last 2.5 years.
Yeah, I really like the distinction you made. The American public is not used to this kind of a dialogue. They're used to these bullet points, these 30-second sound bites, these things that touch on chords. And this was one of the things that I worried about because it takes a person, and I'm talking about Americans now, and I know you'll agree, American people, by and large, are not stupid. They're brainwashed, yes. But for anybody who is a little bit objective, they have to be intellectually curious enough, interested enough to take the time to listen to the whole thing. Many people, I am sure, if they started watching it, especially the first part with this 30 minutes on Russian history, I don't think most Americans could stomach that, personally.
Oh, you're right.
So what I thought was so different but so important is that Putin took the opportunity, and Tucker gave him the opportunity to tell his side without really interrupting him, challenging him, or trying to trick him. And I think Americans, probably one of the reasons a lot of people are criticizing him is because he didn't come across as an attack dog. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, and even when they aren't attack dogs, even when they conduct a basically more or less civil interview, it still doesn't matter because the whole point of the interview is just to get enough wording out of Vladimir Vladimirovich that you can cut and splice as you need to get just a little bit here and just a little bit there. And they try to do that too. Look, I was listening to the British news the other day being yesterday, and out of a 2-hour speech, they got 2 points. Putin threatens us with war because he said, if American boots are on the ground in Ukraine, faced off Russian boots, there's going to be a war. It's going to be a fighting war. So Putin's threatening America with a fighting war and NATO. And the other one is, Putin liked Trump.
Yeah.
The problem for them is, of course, that there's the whole interview. Unlike normally when Kelly Megan or somebody else goes in there, does an interview, which are all basically blacklisted. They won't be able to ever get that interview again because nobody trusts them. They'll take out a whole phrase, again, just like this, but you'll never see the whole interview. But here you got the whole interview.
Yeah, and you mentioned anybody can watch this unedited, raw on YouTube and Tucker's channel. They don't have to go to their news media. They don't have to go to Fox, MSNBC, the BBC, or whoever. They can see it all unvarnished. And I obviously, Stas, obviously, and I don't know where they're located, but there were over 100 million views in 24 hours. And those numbers are going up as people have time. Not everybody had the time to sit down and listen to 2 hours of Putin's interview because of work. It came right in a work week. It wasn't like a weekend. God forbid it was this weekend because you got the Super Bowl. I mean, who would watch? So I think, as you mentioned, the really important thing is that if people really wanted, they could go to Twitter or they could go to Tucker's website or YouTube and watch it all for free. Let's move on to the content. Everybody, I mean, real serious analysts have gone through that and have analyzed it word for word, sentence for sentence. Serious people have done that. What are your thoughts on what stood out? I mean, there was so much in 2 hours, so many topics. I thought Putin was so deliberate, but he didn't just let Tucker change the subject. He knew what he wanted to say and where he was going with this. And I thought he was masterful at that. But what stood out for you? Was there anything? Well, I have said there's really nothing new, but I think there were some new things in there for the vast majority of people and for mainstream media, things they had never heard before. What are your thoughts on the content of this? And was there anything new?
Well, overall, there was, at least for me, and I think for the majority of Russians who've been paying attention, there's absolutely nothing new. If you paid attention to any of his speeches before, and he said it's basically a rehash. The difference is nobody in the West does. As Colonel McGregor has said many times, you know, if you really want to understand the man, just listen to his speeches. Because there's so many speeches, nobody that's lying through their teeth is going to be able to lie continuously and keep the same line. It just doesn't happen. I mean, there's so many of these speeches. You could just go back and you can read them or listen to them, and you get the same point. This is just finally all of this condensed into a 2-hour format that's actually going to get to somebody, as opposed to just the Western elites listening to it and ignoring it, or chopping up segments out of it to play to their own propaganda. So that's the biggest difference right there. Now, the history lesson was good. You're right. The vast majority of Americans have no idea of their own history, let alone somebody else's history. Sad to say, but American education, modern American education, is worse than third world, because the difference in third world, it's a limited number of people that can get that education, but it's usually a very high level education. Whereas in America, most people can get their education, but it's not worth anything. I mean, the country suffers from 21% illiteracy rate, for God's sakes, official statistics. What can you say about that? So for the vast majority of Americans, but the reason you need that history is to put it in context, because right now, the whole press in the West, including various YouTube history channels that have all booted into anti-Russian crap, is pushing this line that that Russia is this alien entity that's come in to take over land, and claiming that it's ancient Russian land, where it's always been Ukraine. There's never been Ukraine, and that's the whole point. And the people there are Russians. That's the other whole point. The other thing that he said that a lot of people in Poland are going to find very uncomfortable is reminding them of their own little historical oopsies, like the fact that Poland was Hitler's first ally. Poland represented the Nazis in the League of Nations, because they were banned out of the League of Nations. And Poland got a chunk of Czechoslovakia, and so on and so on. You know, that all these guys are trying to show themselves to be the great Democrats and the lovers of Western. Yeah, okay, yeah. And then there's reality. And a lot of that stuff wasn't said for a long time, including by the Soviet Union, because they want to have keep good relations with Poland, regardless of what government was there. So nobody wanted to remind them of their own history. And I'm glad it's finally being reminded. Because one, we don't color our history. We know our history, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And there's enough ugly there too. And then we'll be reminded about all the time by everybody else. But the moment you start showing the mirror turns around, take a look yourself in the mirror at what you are. Oh, they get offended. Oh, they get angry. And, and that's what it is. And this this interview, it was partially a monologue because it had to be, because you had to get the groundwork down and out to the people once and for all, or maybe just once now. It had to be done, and there it goes. There were people in Russia that were criticizing Carlson that he just concentrated on Ukraine too much, that he wasn't trying to figure out how Russians are or Russian soul. But that wasn't the aim of this interview. I'm sure there's going to be future interviews because he's proven that, when he says he's going to put the whole thing out, he's going to put the whole thing out. So I'm sure there's going to be future interviews and future communications. And God forbid for the neocons and the rest, if Carlson all of a sudden becomes vice president or becomes secretary of state, which I think he would do a good job at. And then there's Russians are complex. There's a point of understanding Russians, and it's not that easy. So I think this is a good first step, and it was information that the Western public needed to hear. The Western elites have heard this plenty of times. So no, I don't think there was anything particularly new that hasn't been said 100 times before. And it's new for the vast majority of the Western audience.
Yeah. Well, I want to comment on two things you said. The historical part, 30 minutes, I've always maintained, and I'll focus only on Russia now. But if you want to understand Crimea, if you want to understand the source, the historical origins, historical context is critical. Because if you understand the history, the lies and subsequent lies and mistruths all get exposed. And so I thought Putin knew he had to do that. He had to put this in a historical, put what? This conflict in Ukraine. And that's what this interview was all about. That's what Tucker wanted to find out. He wanted Americans to know what this barbarian, this assassin, this murderous person in Russia was all about in terms of invading Ukraine. Let's face it, that's what it was about. So when people said, oh, he should have asked him questions about, oh my God, aliens, 9/11, Israel, China. I mean, give me a break. If they want to know what he thinks about that, they can go to his speeches. They can look it up. It's all on Kremlin. But I thought that was brilliant of him, probably knowing that most Americans wouldn't listen to it all. The other thing that you said was something that I think is important. Tucker Carlson, being an American, is open to learning, but he hasn't spent much time learning about Russia, Russian history, Russian culture, Russian values, Russian Orthodox religion. He's basically ignorant. And he certainly has no idea of the Russian soul. And I think that Tucker Carlson, in this interview, and I'm going back to the first question, I think he came here like he has done many times since he left Fox in interviews, has been trying to learn what he can about other people's opinions, whether they be political or celebrities or whatever. And I thought he was a little stiff in the way he was looking at Putin. And it was almost like, oh my God. But I think Tucker Carlson was super impressed and was listening carefully to what Putin said, because Tucker got an education on these 2 hours with Vladimir Putin. I think for me, in terms of Tucker Carlson, he learned a whole lot more than he anticipated from meeting with Vladimir Putin for 2 hours. Now, one of the things I thought struck me and stood out when he said, well, who blew up the pipeline? And Putin immediately said, without hesitation, you did. No, not you, Tucker. And this was the humor that I loved. And Tucker said, I was busy that day, so it couldn't have been me. And Putin said, no. He made it very clear. It was the CIA. The only one with the motive and the ability to do it. For me, I'm convinced it was the United States that did it. Now, who in the United States? Joe Biden supposedly gave the order, but who was it that cooked that damn thing up? It was not Kirby. It was not Blinken. It was not Sullivan. The only ones that could have cooked up something like that and had the power and the ability to do it is the CIA. Your thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, let's go back to Putin. And you're right. The image of Putin in the West is something between a maniac, dictator, something out of James Bond, to a maniac, cold-blooded murderer, something out of James Bond, to some comedic idiot that can't put on his pants right. All depends on what column and what day it's being written. The West, well, Tucker Carlson, first of all, whatever he wants to think, he's still got the stereotypes. That's what he's hearing. So he meets the real man, and the West now, the Western audience now meets the real man and sees that he's a very rational, patriotic human being. He's not some maniac who woke up one day and said, let's start a war. He's not some maniac that goes out shooting people. He's actually a very rational, normal human being, well above in his abilities, above most people, at least mental abilities. As for when Putin said you, any Russian that was listening, because there's inclinations and there's subcontext in any language, any Russian listening understood that you meant America and Tucker as part of that America. The translation, of course, Tucker took it as, well, me, I was, but any Russian listening that would have understood that the reference was meaning toward the U.S. and Tucker being part of the U.S. as that overall you. I can't think of the English word for tonkosти in the Russian, the subcontext. I guess that would be probably the best word. The subcontext in different languages. That unless you're a carrier of the language, or you're not just fluent, but you understand the culture enough to understand the cultural context, you wouldn't get, just because that's how it is. There's subcontext in any language. I thought that as far as the CIA, I mean, come on, it wasn't some Ukrainian oligarch and the minnow and the captain and the movie star. I mean, for God's sakes. And yes, I just lost the vast majority of Generation Z and millennials with that reference. I mean, it's obvious these were state actors, and these were major state actors. Nobody was going to get in that area where NATO was conducting maneuvers just because. These are armored, heavy, industrialized pipes, armored, with a concrete shell around them. So that just in case nothing happens, like, ship sinks on top of them. There were 200, 2 or 3 tons of explosives. Again, you're not going to carry this on a small ship and just throw it overboard and hope something blows up. This was done professionally. And the only countries that have that level of profession and have the motivation are the US and the UK. That's it. Occam's razor. There's only two people. There's only two countries. It broke the fact that the Germans are spineless beyond all imagination. I'm a quarter German, and it makes me sick and sad that the German race can be that mindlessly spineless. I mean, come on. You are being driven to extinction, and you're still going, okay.
But people are rising up. The tractors and the protests around Germany, it's their leadership. And what you're saying, I agree with. The people, like in America, have either been so brainwashed or so passive, they've allowed it to happen. And that's what's tragic.
The fact that a small slice of society, the farmers, and they're not rising up against they're not rising up against this war. They're not. They're rising up against very specific things. The nitrogen bans and the fuel subsidy going away because fuel's gone up. That's what they're rising up against. They're not rising up against the fact that they're going to go die soon. Very, very soon, they're all going to get the chance to die. Their kids are going to be turned into fertilizer on the Eastern Front. I mean, for God's sake, there's no other way to put this than that. They're on the cusp of World War III. There are Germans already being killed. Idiot Germans are going there. Well, at least one tank was taken out with the driver still alive and dying, who said he was Wehrmacht. I mean, I'm sorry, Bundeswehr, not a Merc. I mean, at this point, the Germans are already fighting, even though they're not quite yet fighting. And they're going to be getting soon conscripted because the big fight's coming. And they're too stupid or lazy to friggin' do something about it. Well, fine. There won't be a Germany when this is over. I'll tell you this, for those listening, straight up. If we Russians have to take Berlin for a fourth friggin' time in 300 years, and the Germans never took Moscow, not once. We've taken Berlin 3 times in 300 years. If there's another one 400 within these 300 years, a fourth time, don't ever think you're getting Berlin back. It's going to be back being a Slavic city that it was originally back 1,000+ years ago. That's it. The German project is over. No unification ever again because it's impossible. The Germans are going to show their faces fully. So you either stop this crap, and the best way to, in my personal opinion, okay, I'm radical on this, is to put a lot of these politicians' heads on spikes. Quite literally, I mean that. To send a message. Either the people get up with the pitchforks and torches and take their lives into their own hands, or they're going to follow off that cliff, just like their grandparents did, just like their great-grandparents did. There's only 2 choices. There is no, I'm going to sit here and this will pass me by. It won't. And by their actions or inactions, they're going to determine their fate. And Western Prussia is going to become Western Russia, because the emotional state here is that's it. And whether or not they're saying that, that's the emotional state. That's the logical state. That's it. There ain't going to be another time after this. We survived this. There won't be another Germany ever again. So the Germans better wake the hell up. I mean, I don't know how else to put it. I've said this many times, and some Germans are awake, thank God, but the vast majority aren't. Even the ones protesting, they're protesting about very narrow economic platforms. They're protesting that they're going to get to go die soon. En masse, again. On our land, again. So, okay, sorry, I'm a little emotional at that point. But you would think after 2 go-arounds, a third one would be out of the question. But no.
I'm happy to have people hear your passion, your commitment. But I think that the government in Russia, Putin, I think the military, I think the State Department, in much calmer terms, know and understand what you just said. Putin is not going to allow it to happen again. When he talked about denazification is not just Ukraine. It's embedded in several of these other countries, the United States and Canada. But I want to get back to the interview. How important do you think this interview was? How effective do you think it was? And I'm talking globally now. So in the United States, in Europe, in Asia, and in Russia, how effective do you think it was?
Well, the effect globally, we can't really speak globally because the vast majority of the globe already listens to what Putin has said in many, many of his speeches. So it's no surprise to the Chinese or to the Vietnamese or to the Arabs. They listen, or the South Americans. They listen and they understand. The Africans see what happens and they see what the benefits of having Russia on their side. They no longer have to pay France, sell their goods for nothing. They can actually work toward their own people in their own country and so on. It's the audience is the U.S. and its vassals, Europe. Well, okay, I can't even say Europe. That's incorrect because Russia owns 1/4 of Europe. So let's say the EU and NATO, including Canada, including Australia, New Zealand, South Korea in this case, and Japan can be lumped in there too because they're effectively Asia. They're the Asia version of NATO. These countries all deny reality, and they don't listen. And for the people there to listen to this, I think it's going to be very effective. How effective? We're going to have to wait and see. The politicos, unless they get pressure from below, and even then, I don't know whether they'll change anything. I'm hoping that with the vote in Congress, they're going to push something through one way or the other. And I'm very hopeful that at least for the populist wing of the Republican Party, this is going to be a very good foundation interview that they can go back and say, no, just no. We're not going to war with Russia. They're not insane maniacs sitting there where they have no interest in us or anybody else. This is a separate fight. Let them finish it out, and no more money. That's what I'm very much hoping come out of this. In other words, we get to step back from the edge of World War III.
You've talked about the election coming up. I don't want to get into Biden and whether he's going to run or not. I personally don't think he will run. I think they'll remove him. They'll slide him out because it's such an embarrassment to put him out on the stage and have to campaign, if he even does that, against Trump, and it's probably going to be Trump. Europeans and NATO are scared to death about Trump. But since you mentioned the election and how Congress might change, and whether it's a populist like Trump, I guess you'd have to call him that. Do you think if Trump is elected, relations between the United States and Russia will change?
I think they will. And by the way, listen to Farage. He comes out with this. Trump actually told me that he threatened Putin that if Putin invades into Ukraine, that there will be strikes on Moscow. Honestly, don't believe for a second that he was told that. It's another lying piece of shit globalist with a slightly less centric globalist view. And Trump knows quite well that if he had struck Moscow, Washington would be struck 10 minutes later. And where would that get us all? And I know this too because when they got onto Trump to bomb Syria, and he did, but the strikes were pretty meaningless, and they were meant to be meaningless. Mostly hitting empty places, so kind of checkmark strikes. So, yeah, in 24 hours, nothing gets solved in 24 hours. Too late for 24 hours. But that it would go in that direction very quickly, I think it would. Now, how would the Congress react? That's a very good question. And if it's any indication of how they reacted to Trump previously, well, the 11 spy agencies are going to be against him. And they're going to be against him because, as Trump's already said, they were against him to begin with. So if he comes back, which I'm afraid they'll probably try to kill him, because these people's lives are on the line. Not only are they going to get fired, they're going to have charges against them, very rightful charges against them for corruption, for treason, and for a lot of other things. So all these top directors of the CIA, of the FBI, of NSA, and the other 8 organizations, they're all have got to be understanding that they're screwed. They're screwed totally if Trump comes back. So we'll have to live and see. But I think relations will get much better. As you know, Putin said, since February 2022, there's been no direct communication with Russia between Putin and Biden. Or Putin, well, you can barely talk to Kamala Harris. You don't know who's worse to talk to, Biden or the job.
Nothing at that level. Nobody to talk to.
Yeah. So, you know, that's if Trump could get Flynn back in, if Flynn would go in for round 2 after what he went through before, things would get really, really better. General Flynn. So, and rational. And the Europeans are scared of this. Of course, the European elites are all in for this war because it lets them retain power. No matter how much they're destroying their economies, it lets them retain power. And they can shut up all their opponents by sending them off to the front or arresting them. It's times of war, martial law. So, yeah, the European elites, the globalists are very paranoid about this. And they should be. Now, the risk of Trump being murdered, let's put it out the way it is, assassinated, murdered by the regime in D.C., aren't little. The question is, how much are they willing to risk the reality of civil war? Because I think something like that, a motivator like that, could spark. Where Texas and the border, they're a big block in that future civil war, and the foundation of future civil war. But it's not that civil war. But an assassinated Trump, a martyred Trump, which would be a martyred Trump, I think that would be the spark. That would be the actual final spark to show that anybody with a conservative mindset that you're either going to be broken, destroyed, or you're going to have to change. Because look, you've got no way in body politic. They'll do anything to stay in power. So it's going to be an interesting next 7 months, 8 months. Very interesting.
Yeah. I hadn't expected to get into this, but I have said 2 things. If Trump does get elected again, he's got all of those intelligence agencies that are against him, plus the whole swamp in Washington. And unless he acted like he did the last time, got in line, they'll kill him.
Yeah.
But I think, as you were indicating, things are different today than when they were in 1962 when they killed President Kennedy. As you mentioned, Trump has got 80 million plus supporters in this country. You've got those 25 Republican states who are standing up against the government, with Texas against immigration.
Yeah.
And you have a very angry populace, seriously divided. Is a civil war possible?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But would these people who would kill him, the same ones that killed Kennedy or their descendants, would they dare assassinate Trump the way they did Kennedy? I don't know that they would be that stupid. I don't know how they'll deal with it. But as you said, it's going to be interesting. The second point I wanted to make, and I didn't expect to talk about this tonight, you will recall when Trump went to Helsinki to meet with Putin. They met for several hours. They both came out, both hopeful, both positive. Trump didn't even get back on his plane to come back to the U.S. before Lindsey Graham, John McCain, the media had crucified him, castigated him publicly. And what you saw shortly after he got back was a 180-degree turn. He caved in to the swamp, to the threats. I think they threatened his life and his family.
Oh,
But
sure.
if he, and I think he will, probably his number one priority, because he said, I'm going to end the war in Ukraine in 24 hours. Bullshit. It's not possible. But I think he will. His first telephone call when he gets in the Oval Office will be to Vladimir Putin. What do you think?
I think so. You know, the difference between the 60s and today, the vast majority of the people, even though they were much better educated than modern Americans, I mean, many times better educated. You should know what the standards were back then. My oldest daughter was in a private school for a couple of years in the U.S., a Catholic school, and they were on the 1960 standards. I mean, it was day and night compared to now. But they were naive at the same time. They were very well educated. They're naive. They believed in the government. They believed in this America that they were brought in to believe. So to believe that that America, that the people that are supposed to be protecting America would murder a president was beyond the pale of belief for probably 95% of the population. Ain't nothing like that now. Most people know how much the government lies now. Basically, somebody in the government speaking, they're lying. Their lives have gone downhill. I mean, every year gets worse. Whereas in the 60s, every year was getting better. So it was hard to believe that. But now, I mean, people see what it is. Their lives are getting miserable. They're being broken. The government lies to them nonstop. I mean, it's the conspiracies, unless we're talking aliens and, center of the earth type conspiracy and reptiloids type conspiracy. Most conspiracy theories just become basically a preview of what's coming in the next 6 to 12 months. And the people see that and they understand that, and it's starting to penetrate, especially the people that are backing Trump. And they know that their livelihoods and maybe their lives and their kids' futures are going to be taken away from them. I mean, their kids are going to be chopped in some black market chop clinic. It's going to take off their testicles or take off their breasts or do whatever else chemical experiments they want on them, because welcome to the liberal agenda. And they know that. I mean, everything's at stake now. Whether the can can't get kicked down the road anymore. The can's been run over by a tank. There's no can. So there's a tank with a gun aimed at your forehead, with a main gun. So that's where they're at a point. So I'm very hopeful that Trump will make it alive. And then, yes, there will be a call, and then things will start to end if they don't end before that. There's a good chance they will end before that. General 200 is not going to lead Ukraine to war. And then for the audience to understand, Sarkatsky, in the Soviet Union, starting the Soviet Union, there's a classification on casualties, different categories, whether they're dead, wounded, POW, deserted, or under intoxication, or insane, whatever. There's a lot of different classifications. 200 is dead, KIA. 300 is WIA. So when they say the new nickname is General 200, it means General KIA. He just throws troops away into the meat grinder without any second thoughts. So the chance of Ukraine coming out of this, maybe it might not make it through the end of summer in any form. So we'll have to live and see. But I think if Trump comes into power and hopefully lives to see it, I'm sure either directly or very close indirectly, like the State Department Minister Secretary of the State Department will be on a phone call, and there will be a summit.
Yeah. You started talking about the special military operation, the conflict in Ukraine. The last thing I wanted to ask you before we finish, there's only one person that I know. He's a friend of mine. He's an American. He's living in Panama. His name is Don Hank. He's got a command of several languages, and the Slavic languages, Ukrainian, Russian, he can read them. And he gets his information from a number of Russian, not official sources in Russia, but official sources in Ukraine and military correspondents or bloggers in Ukraine. He puts out a daily missile strike report. Now, I don't know how long it's been. It's been several months, and I get a copy of it every day. According to him, Russia has unleashed daily massive missile strikes from aircraft carrier, cruise missiles from ships, and drones. They have been attacking infrastructure, supposedly, warehouses, command and control centers, factories that are producing drones, and the drones being aerial and marine type drones, unmanned. Stas, I have to ask you, with all of this bombardment and shelling, how can Ukraine possibly be standing?
Well, thank God they're finally sending these missiles. I mean, they took out the microchip out of my washing machine, my dryer. They went over after my coffee maker. I gave them up all my old telephones. I mean, God's sakes. I mean, you know, where else are we getting microchips? Wait. I don't understand why they even go with the story of the washing machine. It make more sense. I guess van der Leyen isn't technologically inclined. It would make more sense to go after the telephones because at least they have built-in GPS systems or navigation systems. The simple fact is Russia is the 5th largest manufacturing base in the world and growing. Thank God for the sanctions. So that there's all these missiles coming should not be in any surprise whatsoever. It shouldn't. We manufacture our own microchips. Yeah, there are not that many. They're not that many for on the commercial side because Taiwan and South Korea and China have the big monopoly. But for specialty equipment, missiles, for tank systems, etc., and military computers and high-end computers, Russia manufactures its own microchips, and there'll be more coming down the road. So it shouldn't be a surprise, but it is because the West has convinced itself that any day now this is going to be the last missile Russia has. Any day now, we've been hearing that for the last 2 years. Any day now they're going to run out of troops, they're going to run out of tanks, they're going to run out of fuel. I mean, I even had a small argument with a guy I used to work with in Cameron, he's back in Houston, who's liberal, believes that all the crap that he's told, spoon-fed. He was trying to tell me that now you're going to start starving to death. Like, dumbass. We're the biggest exporters of wheat in the world. If nothing else, we'll definitely have bread. We're one of the biggest manufacturers in the world of product. Never mind all the other food we make. I mean, seriously, yeah, we're going to be starving to death. But that's the level that's presented to the people in the West. And I think a lot of the politicians believe it too. So that's why they're constantly in shock. Well, let them be in shock. It's always good when your opponent underestimates you.
Stas, I want to thank you for the conversation tonight. It's been really enlightening. People in my audience have had the opportunity to know you, but they haven't had the opportunity to hear you talk about this Putin, the interview. And I think maybe for the first time, because of your passion, people may begin to understand that Russia will not be broken. And if Russia is attacked, and Putin brought this out in the interview, we will strike back with everything we have. Thanks so much for your time again tonight. Enjoy the weekend.
Thank you. Always a pleasure.